All right, we pick up here in section 1.1 again. This will be video 1.1b, second part of this. We start with slide 23. And we're going to talk about the relationships between two categorical variables. Because, when marginal and joint relative frequencies, they don't really tell us much about the relationship between them. So we're going to kind of use some other measures here called a conditional relative frequency. Gives the percent or proportion of individuals that have a specific value for one categorical variable among individuals who share the same value of another. Okay, that's the condition. So what we might be talking about, what percent of environmental club members? Okay, so when we talk about environmental club members, we're talking about this yes column here. And we're saying, well, okay, what percent of those people are snowmobile owners? Okay, so you can kind of see where we're headed. We can see there it is. All right, 16 are owners out of that 305. So that, again, that was the condition, is that they are environmental club members. So it's a conditional relative frequency. So we're just using that. So it's 16 out of the 305, which is about 5.2%. All right, let's try that again here. Now, the distribution of snowmobile use among environmental club members is called the conditional distribution of snowmobile use among environmental club members. Okay, so again, we can kind of do this and say, okay, what of the the condition is that we are environmental club members. Well, the conditional distribution would have here is that 69.5% never, 25.2 do rent, and a small percentage, 5.2 actually own for that. So that's kind of the distribution we have with that. All right, now we can find the distribution of snowmobile use among the survey respondents who are not environmental club members in a similar way. All right, so again, the ones that are not environmental club, there's 1,221, so here are the numbers of each. So just make those percentages. Just take 445 divided by the 1,221, the 497 divided by the 1,221, and that. And then we can have ourselves a nice little distribution here that shows that percentage that we have. Okay, now again, some good AP tips as we get talking about this here. Good AP tips that we have is that when comparing groups of different sizes, be sure to use percents, relative frequencies. Percents are proportion, okay? Because one group might have more than the other, in which case you might say, well, 100 here, 100 here fit that category, but that might be different because of the sample size. So 100 out of 500 is certainly different than 100 out of 150. So by using percents and proportions, we kind of get it all, comparing apples to oranges, as we say, instead of using those counts, okay? Now, again, when you make statements, this is a big thing. When you're writing these things, we want to be able to write it the way that you're going to get the most points out of. And so avoid things like more club members never use snowmobiles. You kind of say something like a greater percentage, using that in percentages, because more club members, well, yeah, you got to get it to relative, so you want to always refer to that percentage. So a greater percentage of club members never use snowmobiles. So kind of pay attention to those language things, especially as you're going through the homework. Check those problems and kind of mimic your phrasing a little similar to that. So get those going. That'll maximize your points. So that's a good AP tip. All right, some other ways that we can compare things is a side-by-side bar graph that displays the distribution. The bars are grouped together and then they're showed side by side, which kind of is a nice way to compare. And another way is a segmented bar graph. It compares those distributions, segments of a rectangle, where the area is the same proportion to the percent in that corresponding category. So here's what they look like. The side-by-side bar graph, you'll kind of see it there. Again, pay particular close attention. You see that we do have percent on that, so that it's relative. Remember, we start at 0 on that axis. Now, the segmented bar graph, this is kind of interesting. Sometimes it can be a little confusing. You got to be there. If you don't have color, you got to use some different lines or shadings. But this kind of shows you that as well. So a couple different ways of kind of comparing, again, the side-by-side, no versus yes. You can kind of see how those kind of compare. Kind of a slick way of doing it, really. So some different ways of representing that so that we can visualize that data. That's key. That's key. All right, now a mosaic plot. This is kind of a kooky one here. It's where the width of each rectangle is proportional to the number of individuals in the corresponding category. So this one is, again, kind of a little way of doing it. It's a little confusing sometimes. You look at those. I like the other two better myself. But all right, so we want to talk about association. Now, there is an association between two variables if knowing the value of one variable helps us predict the value of the other. much like in a case like this. If we know one of the variables, we can use that to predict. Now, if there's no association, then knowing the value of one variable really doesn't help you predict the value of the other, and so you might see something like this. Okay, so I want to talk about that association as we look at those. Okay, now remember, just because there might be association doesn't mean one causes the next. We'll talk about that repeatedly here. Okay, so keep that in mind. There could be an association, doesn't mean one necessarily causes the other. Okay, so highlighting things out of 1.1, again, here are the learning targets that we talked about. As we talked about that, we should be able to make and interpret bar graphs for categorical data, identify what makes it misleading. The big thing is when you have, again, those things that we talked about where if we draw pictures, those pictographs can be very misleading because they look bigger than what they actually are in that relationship. And then just make sure that you're always starting that vertical axis at 0. That's huge. Calculate marginal and joint relative frequencies from a two-way table. Okay, we looked at that. And then calculate the conditional relative frequencies. Okay, that's where we kind of limit it down to a conditional category, and then we found it just out of that category, those percentages. Use bar graphs to compare distributions, so it might be side by side as we talk about those. And yeah, we have those all sorts of bar graphs to look at there to compare. And then describe the nature of the association. So be able to say if there is an association or not, and then be able to describe that. So that's kind of what we're looking at 1.1. So we're all set and ready to go. So get working on those problems and come see me if you need any help. And again, I'm Mr. Boone. We'll see you next time.